I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Gunnar, Mark, Alexander, Catherine, Tilo, Emilia, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mersham, Galen, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Chance, Chase, Dan, Big Bob, David H, Y. Kellerman, Sadeed 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Before we get on with this edition of the show, I just want to remind you that I don't have an advertiser right now, so I could really use your support at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. It is you, the listener, that keeps this show going, and I could really use your support. Even $1 a month will help, but I do this pretty much full time. I've taken a little bit of a break this summer, releasing a slightly less content just because I had food poisoning the other week, and now I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. Hopefully you'll see more content this week and in the coming weeks, hoping I don't get sick again. But anyways, I do need your support at patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that out of the way, we have a returning guest, Emil Draitser, author of the trilogy of books about his experiences in both the Soviet Union and the United States. That trilogy begins with Shush, Growing Up Jewish Under Stalin, a memoir. That was then followed up by Farewell Mama Odessa, a novel. And finally, the third book to complete the trilogy was In the Jaws of the Crocodile, a Soviet memoir. In those books, Emil discusses everything from his time as a satirical writer in the Soviet Union to his experiences in America when he moved here in the 1970s. He now has a new book dealing with what it means to be a Russian emigre and the process of his own Americanization. The book is entitled Laughing All the Way to Freedom, the Americanization of a Russian Emigre, and I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. We go into a lot of different directions. We even talk about Emil's appearance on the Merv Griffin show, where he talked about Russian humor. So there's a lot to discuss, and I want to get right to it with Emil Draitser. So, with that being said, on to the conversation. Welcome back to Parallax Views, a guest that I'm very happy to welcome back to the show. He is a Russian immigrant and specializes in satire, but he has a long history. He recently wrote a trilogy of books on his experiences as a Russian immigrant in America, and his latest is sort of the fourth book, that comes after this trilogy. It's called Laughing All the Way to Freedom, Americanization of a Russian Emigre. How are you doing, Emil Draitser?
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to present my new work to your audience. Hopefully they remember the previous one, Farewell Mama Odessa, where actually it was covering only my first American impression for the first couple of years. Obviously now it's actually, at the end of this year will be 50 years as I came to America. So I was on the age of 37 when I came to this country. But I was really lucky to that it was a Cold War. It was a shortage of teachers of Russian in America, and they offered me opportunity I could not refuse because I always wanted to have a literary education. And UCLA offered me to teach Russian and also to enroll as a graduate student in UCLA. So several years later, that all came to be. Yeah.
If you could, just for the sake of my listeners, the last time we spoke, we talked about your book, In the Jaws of the Crocodile, a Soviet memoir. And that also comes alongside the book, Shush, Growing Up Jewish Under Stalin, a memoir. And the other memoir is Farewell, Mama, Odessa, a novel. So that's sort of the trilogy. Maybe you could talk about how this new book, Laughing All the Way to Freedom, connects to those three previous books.
Well, actually, it has as I kind of mentioned, it has a direct connection to the previous book, Farewell, Mama, Odessa, because the book, in the book, I was able to, in a kind of transparent form. Actually, I tell why. My first impressions of America were the first few years, not really going deep into the country's everyday being and what it's all about. So, but in this new book, Laughing All the Way to Freedom, I don't know whether you have the cover of it, I try to go deeper. And actually, I started with actually thinking about it. Although I'm not observant Jew, but I respect as a scholar and as a Jewish person, respect biblical writing because I believe it expresses the wisdom that was accumulated through many, many, not only years, millenniums of what it's all about. And actually, my new book actually proves to the point that you cannot just go directly from a country where you were a slave into a country, a free country, without spending 40 years in desert. No matter how you understand the desert, desert means, understand, in the book of Exodus, it says that actually Moses said that God told, well, we have to, if you were over age of 20 and you upon exit of Egypt, then you have to spend 40 years in desert. What does it mean? It means if you're a grown man, willy-nilly, with the first, as you grew up, slave is inside of you. Every bit of existence made you a slave, and you cannot get rid out of it. What does it mean, my sense, in the biblical times, 40 years in desert? Come on, very few survived of this. With my generation, with my exodus from the country of the Red Pharaohs, as I call the ex-Soviet Union, we actually didn't have this chance. We were simply took any opportunity we possibly could and jump out of the small window that time opened for opportunity for immigration. So therefore, there was no time, not 40 years in desert. The desert was inside of us, and that's what actually, I'm, if I may mention, I'm finishing work on my new book beyond that, which is called Chekhov in Brighton Beach, which signifies that why Chekhov? Because Chekhov is like a signal. Okay, we all came from Russian culture. The Soviet Union, Soviet Jews came built on the Russian language, Russian culture, and so on. And Brighton Beach is a kind of an example of as I say, a symbolic word for that identifies these immigrants from the Soviet Union who settled in Brighton Beach, but only those who prefer to be to stay there. In other words, they prefer to come out of the country, but not into America. I remember I had a friend who lived in Brighton Beach, and I asked him, have you sometime traveled to Manhattan? Oh, no, for us, it's a foreign travel. You go into Manhattan, it's everything in English. The whole world, it's totally a totally different world. So, so from that standpoint, I was really thought of it. What happened when we came? I try to go back when we came to this country without being prepared for what the kind of life. People who live in America assume that everywhere is the same. The whole world is like their world. No, absolutely not. And so on so many ways, it was totally different.
If you could, you made that reference to Exodus and the biblical story of the Exodus, and how, the mass emigration of Russian Jews from the former Soviet Union in the 1970s is there's some parallels there between that and the biblical story. Can you talk first about what led to the mass emigration of Russian Jews from the Soviet Union in the 1970s? And then we can get into the parallels with the biblical story.
Yes, actually, I do cover this particular issue in one of the chapters of my book, where I already an American citizen, as a student, graduate student at UCLA. All of a sudden, I realize, not all of a sudden, you already mentioned that back in the Soviet Union, I was a satirical writer. If I may explain in a nutshell, what does it mean? It meant you can criticize some sides of Soviet reality, but do not generalize. In other words, you can say that factory number 17 is producing bad shoes, but you cannot say the economy cannot handle anything of good quality, of market and so on. So therefore, again, back to America. I am in America, let's say about maybe 5-6 years, a graduate student at UCLA. And as I pass, secretary of department tells me, Emil, listen, there is a phone call coming in. Could you answer? Because anyway, I picked up the phone and a woman asked, could you tell us, please, how to some personal name for a tiger? I say, tiger? You know what? I'm basically not socializing with tiger that much. But if it's a cat, we'll call it Kisa. And she said, great, Kisa, wow. I say, why you need it? Well, we're organizing protests to save Siberian tigers. And so we need like for a picture, the name says, save Kisa, things like that. And then I, again, ex-Soviet satirists, write a column that was published actually not only in Russian, in English, in Los Angeles Health Examiner, where I make fun. Oh, Americans protest, whatever they feel like they're protesting and so on and so forth. And then when I reread this so many years later, now before working this book, I realized, idiot me, if Americans didn't have right to protest, I would not be able to come to this country, because we're all able to come here because of a huge Soviet Jewry movement. So many people of all walks of life, of all religion, came out on the streets protesting, demanding freedom of immigration. It was introduced by Banning Commandment and so on, condition. The Soviet Union, fortunately, at that time, Soviet Union already was dying in a sense that their economy could not work without buying grain from America or from Canada. In other words, they depended on foreign trade. They could not go out of it. So that's what I'm trying to say, that I came to realize, if not American protest movement on such a huge scale, how can I make fun of this? You know, that's the irony of it. That's why I'm laughing. That's the title of the book, Laughing All the Way to Freedom. It's now laughing. Now means not when we were doing it. Now, when I look back, I realize I had to free my head. Not only that, and then I remember there's a wonderful American saying that I immediately realized. So it's so much fit. You can take a village boy out, or you can take a country boy out of the country, but you cannot take country out of the country boy. Okay, so perfectly fit. And then I was acquainted with some American social worker, and they say, well, we all observed a long time ago that it's easier to take a Soviet Jew from Soviet Union than Soviet Union from a Soviet Jew, because we all were conditioned from childhood. I was going through all 10 years of schooling, needless to say, and I was obviously, again, the term brainwashed, I don't like, frankly speaking, because it's just the opposite. The brain is not washed. The brain is contaminated with all kinds of stuff that doesn't fit logic, and so, but it takes time to go through it. So that's why I'm saying that I was probably able, I kind of understand I was able to write this book because I became American after 40 years. That was biblically described. I arrived exactly, but when my student asked me, when did you leave Russia? I say any time of the week I can wake up and say October 8, 1974. Okay, that's why I left. You cannot forget it because of many. Your life changed completely. There's no question about it. There's no comparison.
How did say you and others end up immigrating? Like what led to that mass emigration?
Well, first of all, Soviet Union, because as I explained, so much dependent on the foreign trade, especially getting grain from America and Canada and some other countries, that they decided to save their face. In other words, people from the Soviet, first of all, not everybody could immigrate in my time. Absolutely not. Why? Because is everybody, then the whole idea, the propaganda that the Soviet Union is example of how people should live and all of it doesn't make any sense. So therefore, the political machine came to a very clever kind of explanation of immigration to allow minorities, majority of which live in capitalist country, to emigrate, to join to the families. In other words, they care about families. Okay, it's so laughing matter. People looked like the Soviet Union never cared about any family, so doesn't matter. Why they and this say this because it actually meant not all minorities, of course. It what meant Jews, Armenians, and Germans, especially living on the Volga River, they were allowed to go back and to obviously Federal Republic of Germany if they're normal, not from one cage to another one. Okay, so that's how it happened. In other words, thanks to necessity, I repeat, necessity to get help because Soviet Union eventually, as we know, it collapsed for one reason, not ideological. I don't think so. No, it just simply could not function anymore. It did not work, could not feed its own population. That's all.
So I wanted to get into, your reflections on maybe, I guess the word for it would be culture shocks. When you come to America and, sort of grappling with different aspects of American culture and life, what are the challenges? What are some of the culture shocks that you experienced?
Well, some shocks were kind of would be again, most of the shock, of course, like everything. Americans don't appreciate what they have, and the first shock that we all experienced when we came is obviously from a country with shortages to a country to abundance. And the supermarket is something that blew most of our minds. We could not, okay, we understood that, okay, they have everything in America, but why they have to have let's say coffee, 5, 6 brands. We were happy to get one. That was enough. Why we need to make it, to break our heads to buy? In other words, this something, again, it's a mentality of people who lived always in deficiency of product. And even I remember that it was at about the same time. Probably the best way to illustrate this reaction is it's a real story of 1976. A Soviet pilot, Belyanka, defected to Japan on the latest kind of a Soviet fighter. He flew to Japan, landed it, and obviously was brought to America, brought to Washington, D.C. for debriefing. And so once, this is, I was told a true story, once he was taken, by CIA agent or probably Pentagon agent to his hotel. And on our way to hotel, the agent said, you know what, I'm sorry, but I forgot, my wife asked me to buy some instant coffee. Would you care to come with me? I said, well, they came. He bought coffee and they went back. Only took a few minutes of present there. And this Pentagon kind of officer kind of was surprised that the Belyanko became angry, did not really unsympathetic. I mean, why are you doing it to me? I said, what did I do to you? Listen, I don't understand it. You Americans are crazy. I already risked my life. I flew with the airplane I gave you everything inside. Why you need it all show for me? He believed that the whole supermarket in Washington, D.C. was put together just to impress him. He could not realize that this this is every day in every town and city. I remember the joke that we had all the time that carried on from the Soviet Union, coming to a provincial small town and find basically all necessities there. We say, they have the good supply system, yeah. Because nothing like that was ever. In the Soviet Union, if you live in Moscow or Leningrad at that time, in some big cities, more or less they will try to keep it up because foreigners come, tourists. But you go to provincial town and you're back not only 100 years in medieval times in terms of accommodations of life and the level of life. That's what it is. So that was a big shock. Also, something that the attitude, something that was very difficult for us to kind of fathom, that attitude toward work. Work as a key to American life. In what sense? And in what sense? Because we came to, the first time, I noticed there are some cafeterias with this strange kind of abbreviation, TGF. And I asked some of my American brothers, what does it mean? Thank God it's Friday. We couldn't believe it. Why? Because in Soviet Union, we were told, not only told, placards, propaganda, work is a matter of heroism, work is a matter of honor, and no. And Americans admit it. The week is over. We work hard. Now let's crash and have some bite and forget about it. In other words, absence of this kind of unnecessary kind of pitched in kind of enthusiasm about something that you have to do anyway. In the same time, needless to, at the same time, attitude toward work for us back in the Soviet Union was expressed by underground kind of a saying, which said, no matter where you work, it's better that you don't. In other words, you don't put your heart into your work, because the work, what for vast majority of us, the work just gave us enough money for food, period, nothing else. So therefore, there was no respect toward work itself, having work and so on. There was no unemployment. what does it mean, non-employment? That means you work as much as you want to, and nobody's really trying to do the best what they can as an American. At the same time, a way of helping in America, it's obvious. You want to help somebody, you give them a job, okay? And what really happened on my first stage is that I could not understand it, because I had a friend who, American friend, I made American friend because he was fighting he was part of this freedom of Soviet Jewry. And he was owner of a small company that produced drapes in Los Angeles. And so he gave a job trying to help a couple, a married couple who came from Soviet. And he told me, he asked me, Emil, I don't understand it. I gave him a job, but they work as if they take hour-long smoke stops. They don't put, what is it? Because exactly this, because we did not value what does it mean to have a job. You understand? It's a totally different attitude toward work. So that comes obvious kind of misunderstanding. It took a while to understand that actually, well, if you work hard, if you want to do what really, when there is a shortage of work, you better be the best you can. I mean, no matter how you look at it, no? So from that standpoint, at the same time, it was some things were strange for us, culture shock, I would say. I remember there was a famous song, A Wonderful World. I don't know much, a boy sings, I don't know much geography, I don't know much algebra, I don't know much geometry, but I know I love you. And for us, who were brought in the Soviet Union, the education was the key, means you have to be, so, and what is it a way to kind of attract the American girl to say that you don't know much about anything? What is this? We couldn't understand it. It took me years and years to realize that actually education in America, like many other things, are inverted pyramid. In other words, as you go up, and I went up, I mean, I went through, you know, as I said, I got my masters of Russian literature and then doctorate. So the way you go up, the more difficult it is, the more time you have to spend to study, the more effort. So therefore, it's not by chance, and I saw some statistics that actually graduate schools of major American universities are best in the world because of the requirement of hard work you have to put in order to do. So that was kind of a totally different concept. Also, on some kind of everyday manner, a personal car. Needless to say that we, in the Soviet Union, basically very few people are able to own a car. You have to be a famous actor of movies, or famous writer, means writing things that they want you to do, to write and so on. And I actually, I recall that in that respect that in 1987 in Philadelphia, there was an international symposium of political humor. And I was invited because I published at that time a book that became, if not bestseller, but at least it took attention of the mass media. New York Times wrote about it, Washington Post, I was on Merv Griffin's show and things like that. Why? Because the book was Soviet underground, forbidden laughter, Soviet underground jokes. I just simply collected them and published them in English and Russian. And so, therefore, I was invited to this. And then coming back to the car, I met there in Art Buchwald. At that time, he was very famous even in Soviet Union because he wrote columns criticizing White House, Pentagon, and so on and so forth. So when I was introducing him here, I told him about the recent event. At that time, Soviet delegation came to America. It was time of perestroika. And they asked me, "Oh, Emil, why did you leave the best country in the world?" and so on and so forth. I told Art Buchwald that I mumbled something. I didn't want to confrontation anything. And he said, "You should have told them that you left because they did not provide you with parking space." I say, parking space? I couldn't even dream of having a car. You understand? So that's what kind of a, just to understand. So in America, needless to say, I found that the car is kind of a part of everyday life. It's not a luxury. It's really not a luxury. If you need to go from, especially Los Angeles, where I lived my first 12 years in Los Angeles, it was the only way to move around is to have a car. So and it came from obviously a sense that the car is almost like a living being for many Americans, because how I understood it, my daughter immigrated many years later, and she was given by a Jewish community a used car just for the first time. And so the American family who came with this car took a picture together before leaving. It's like he's part of their family, so to speak. So in other words, this is not something I kind of, in time, I realized that for Americans, it is something that becomes a part of life. But probably the most striking, most important things, if you compare two cultures, is attitude toward friendship. In the Soviet Union, friendship was high because sometimes it's more important to have a close friend than to have a relative, because we survived by helping each other, okay? In America, for example, it is advised, do not mix business with friendship, because you may lose either or. In other words, finances, don't mix finances with friendship and so on. In Russia, that's how it survived. Actually, comes end of the month, I was in the Soviet Union. My last job was, I was editor of technical publishing house. My wife at that time was also working, had a job at the research institute, but we had only one small child and we barely could make it to next paycheck. So we asked our friends to give us some money. As soon as we will get it, we will give them it. So that's how we support is basically collectivism. That's what it means. That means you have to support each other, otherwise you perish. So it's a kind of totally different way of, and there is another kind of things that really, till basically, frankly speaking, till today kind of puzzles me, because some years later, my close American friend, it happened to be that I wound up to be after divorce. And he said, "Why wouldn't you read ads in New York of your books or things like that?" And I read and I told him, "Wow, listen, looks like they all want me. I mean, they want a cultured man, intellectual, successful." And he said, "Emil, you're not successful." I say, "What do you mean I'm not successful? I published like 4 or 5 books at that time." I said, no. In America, you're successful when you have a lot of money. Okay, then you're American success, otherwise not. So that's obviously things that we could not possibly kind of envision to understand.
If I could, I hope this doesn't go too off topic, but you mentioned going on the Merv Griffin show, and I know that's actually, I think it's that actual appearance is on YouTube. What was it like doing TV shows like Merv Griffin? I think you were interviewed by Tom Brokaw at some point. I know this is off topic from the book, but I really wanted to ask you about that.
Sure. Well, I have to say that Merv Griffin, I was a Merv Griffin show because the book was published, this Forbidden Laughter, and it was, as I repeat myself, a sensation in America that turned out to be that Russians have sense of humor. And why? Because as you go back into 60s and even the 50s, if you think of any movies related to about Russia, let's say Ninotchka, she had, you remember the Russian commissar, she's coming, she doesn't even smile. You know, only the end of the movie and she falls in love with she produces some kind of a smile otherwise. We know about this I mean, now I learn about it. First, the name Igor, the Slavic name, is given in Mel Brooks movies to all kinds of creatures go green, and so you could not even connect anything with humor. At the same time, probably, as I figure out later, the book came out right shortly after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So, and obviously it created tremendous tension. So probably for most Americans, if if Russians have sense of humor, maybe we can some kind of negotiate with them. Maybe, you know, they're normal people like everyone else. And actually the joke that everybody liked in the book that I recorded, of course, was a question to the radio, Soviet radio, Armenia. Will there be a third world war? The answer, no. But there's going to be such a fight for peace, no stone will be left unturned. Okay, so that's what it is. So in other words, it was a curiosity, a matter of curiosity. That's why Merv Griffin invited me, and then I have on some smaller shows in Los Angeles also with this particular book. Yeah. With Tom Brokaw, he was interviewed me on a different occasion. There was at one point a lot of controversy using the stereotypical images of Russians as being shapeless, big, going. Some of the product where they used kind of old Soviet stereotypes and so on. So they invited me, as obviously at that time already knew me because of my satirical past. I was a correspondent of the satirical magazine Crocodile in Soviet Union. That's why one of the books that you mentioned in the jaws of the crocodile, where I actually go into details about what does it meant at that time to be a Soviet, and how eventually I was disillusioned. And well, eventually that what prompted me to come to America, because I wrote a satirical piece that they published in Crocodile, but the period between filing the material to publication was 3 months. And this 3 months, they didn't know, the publisher, the editor-in-chief, that the author of the play that I made fun of became untouchable, because he became editor-in-chief of the magazine Theater, which is, you cannot touch people of that visibility, you know, in the Soviet Union. So that's how it happened. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So Tom Brokaw, since you asked me this question, they expected me to say something of that sort. Oh, it was stereotype and so on. But I said what I thought. I said, look, the way this stereotype is produced of a big shapeless woman and so on, look, if you eat only cabbage and potatoes, you look like a sack of potatoes. In other words, most people in the Soviet Union were out of shape totally. We didn't have time, the luxury, needless to say. Okay, the way they portrayed capitalists in the Soviet caricature with big stomachs, fat, and so on. When we came to America, we found not at all, just the opposite. They have money for a gym, they have money for all kinds of training and so on. They all benefit. That's what I'm saying. So I did not tell him what he wanted me to say, but I said what I thought. Okay? Needless to say, I was not invited anymore, because that's difficult. You know, that's what I understand. What I'm trying to do with my books, and this is the new book, it's the 10th in English, that I refuse to stay in ghetto, writing only in Russian for people who only read in Russian language. I want American to understand us, our generation, mentality of people who, and appreciate what they have, with all the complexities, with all difficulties we all go through, experience and disappointment and so on. Still, it's a far cry from the country we left.
I wanted to ask you about that next because I know in the book you deal with eventually you visit Odessa after having left, and I think that was an experience of mixed joy with maybe even apprehension, right? So what was that like, being able to go back to Odessa for a visit after you'd lived in America and sort of, I guess, discovered yourself in America and just discovered our whole culture here in America? And then what's it like going back to Odessa after all of that?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because I left Odessa in I was born and raised and got my education, first degree in engineering in Odessa. And I left Odessa in 1960. Then for 3 years, I was working in Kiev as a young engineer. And then the last 12 years, I lived in Moscow, where I became, also start writing and publishing as a satirical writer. So therefore, obviously, I will come to Odessa. Odessa, my native city. There is no question about it. That basically, even my, if you wish, the genre in which I express myself, it comes from Odessa, and I did not know about it because I may have told you previously, but it's worth to repeat. I came to in 1964. It will be 60 years as I already in the writing profession, that I brought a lyrical kind of a sketch to one of the Moscow newspapers. And they looked at it and said, yeah, that's well written, every fine, but listen, you have kind of an accent. What kind of accent you have? In Russian, obviously. I say, well, I'm from Odessa. Oh, then there's no right for a satirical piece. In other words, Odessa and people in Odessa coming from Odessa, because of the mixture of the culture, all culture of the world are there. Not only Ukrainian, Russian, Jewish, Georgian, Greek, no. The way Odessa was built. So therefore, humor was a way of kind of approaching other person. Humor is always has opportunity to soften anything, even some not so pleasant things. You can soften with humor. In other words, not asking, not attacking, but saying something. Is it true that and so on and so forth? Anyway, doesn't matter.
It's a way to humor can become a way to break the ice with people, or help us lower our guards with each other.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. So, and I didn't know about it, but when then my first assignment was the newspapers receive a lot of Soviet newspaper, a lot of letters from the readers about poor quality of goods for the population. So the way I became kind of a satire, because they sent me, they gave me a letter that came to the office of a Moscow newspaper, in which they said, that the quality of overalls for newborn babies are of very poor quality. Literally, in a few days they fall apart, and so something of that sort. Again, we understand the market economy. The producer would not survive. Okay, who will want to buy it? But in Soviet Union, so you have no choice. You understand? You have to buy it. So the way I approached it at that time, I remember all of a sudden, I slept overnight and I said, this young mother comes to a Soviet store and says, I want to buy overall for my baby. And the seller says, what kind of temperament your baby is? Is he choleric? Is he phlegmatic? Is he melancholic? And she said, what has to do with it? No. We sell only for phlegmatic, not for choleric, because if he is very excited and start moving his mood, they will fall apart. Okay, that's a way to criticize the quality of it. You cannot. The baby should be very obedient in order to have this. So therefore, what I'm trying to say is that that brought me in because I felt I'm doing something at least whether the funny bone, because it may help at least something to bring attention to the awful quality of Soviet kind of production in goods. Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to add about that, going back to Odessa for a visit? And then, because I know that that was a portion of the book that a lot of reviewers really liked.
Yeah, well, again, going back to for Odessa, actually, needless to say, I looked at my memory. You see, we think that we look mostly expecting what we saw before. I mean, in childhood exploration and so on. But I have to say that I did not feel. After all, okay. First, something that very few people realize, that living in the Soviet Union, you were isolated from the whole world. That's one of the things that were kind of we were in part of the slavery. You could not go and see any other country without special permissions, being interviewed and under supervision. In fact, there was even a Soviet underground joke about this, that airplane with a group of Soviet tourists comes to Paris. And one of the tourists gets up and says, is anybody here knows how to say in French, I would like to ask political asylum? Then the man starts and then says, what does it mean? You intend to ask for political asylum in France? I said, no, I just wanted to know who is the responsible person in the group. In other words, all of these travelers were under supervision of the KGB, of the special, and in other words, we were totally isolated from the world. So why I'm asking it? Because when I lived in Odessa was, needless to say, that's the city that what meant how it should be. It was no comparison to other cities like Voronezh and so on. But when I came to Paris, already a free man, after I was not surprised. I saw it all in Odessa. Odessa was built by French architects. Catherine the Great built the city inviting French architects. The first mayor of Odessa was Duke de Richelieu. Okay, and his monument to him till now stands on the sun. So in other words, the city was totally different. However, if you will ask me what really happened 2 years ago or more, when Odessa was attacked and bombed, I felt for the first time in my life PTSD. Why? Because as a child, I experienced bombing of Odessa by German bombs. You understand? So, and I realized that now Odessa bombed, they don't just bomb real people in real places. They bomb me because it's every street of Odessa, every corner of it, that still it's in my mind. It hurts me now knowing that it's no longer there. You understand? So that's what it is. So this is probably the most devastating experience I had regarding what's going on now.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the section of the book "Discovering Myself in America." What do you mean by discovering yourself in America? And were there aspects of yourself that you ended up questioning from your experiences in Odessa, that when you come to the U.S., maybe you how do I put it? You question some of your own cultural baggage.
Exactly. That's exactly what. It's not so much I discover my personal, obviously personal qualities are always with you, but what I discovered that the culture in which I grew up, is, what does it mean to grow up in a certain culture? You assume that's how else it should be. That's the way it should be. But when one time I opened a Russian immigrant newspaper in New York, and I saw in the ads, business marriage, деловой брак. So I could not understand what they were. I heard something about companies coming together, you know. So I called the editor. I said, what does it mean? Why personal people would put this there? What does it mean? And he said, no. That means that if some foreigner wants to come to America and legalize and so on, if they come to agreement with with the person who put the ads about the amount of money, I say, wait a minute, at that time I already knew. This is from, at least from what I know, from 5 to 8 years of prison for you defrauding the federal government. This is not a marriage. What is it? And I realized in Soviet, and he said, oh, we are not carrying a responsibility because we say we do not carry responsibility for any ads put here. This is their business. Okay. However, I realized something, that I came from a culture in which law had no respect whatsoever. There was not such a thing. They would say, the Russian proverb says the following: law is a carriage drawbar. You turn it the way you want to. So in other words, who cares? Okay. So in other words, yes, there were law books and so on and so forth, but everybody knew that's not, no judge will carry a process and decide upon book. He will decide upon phone call from his boss. Okay, who to and how to and so on and so forth. So therefore, I realized that I am in a country in which the law is a serious thing. It's not something that. Secondly, what really impressed me, and first time I could not emotionally just responded, is the amount of charity in America visible. I didn't know much about how it works and so on. However, kneeling buses, parking space for handicapped people, sidewalks special designed so you can, if you're on a wheelchair, you can go. I mean, it was incredible for me because nothing like that ever existed back in the Soviet Union. Moreover, as a child, I remember after the war, there was a lot of invalids. I mean, people with no legs, with no hands and so on. They were full on Odessa streets, obviously unhappy, drunk, and so on and so forth. And one day they disappeared from the city. Why? Simply the Soviet government decided that it's not a good picture for foreign students because Odessa was a port in which many foreign tourists came. They were removed and they put in some location in the north. All of them, okay, disappeared like this. So that was difficult for me to fathom. This kind of such a huge difference between treatment of even that what really proved to me that is so deep into the conscience of the Russian people who grew up in Russian culture. They cannot even fathom that kind of a care about a person in need, in physical need. Because I now recall there was one very famous, I don't want to mention name, but famous Russian writer who immigrated to America. And in his memoir, he writes about American fascination with disfigurement. Can you imagine? He could not fathom that this is simply humanity, simply caring for a human. The system feels that this is very important, okay? He could not fathom it. That to what extent, I'm not saying. So that's something that really, really something that really took a tremendous kind of a time to understand that it's a totally different kind of cultural values, if you wish, of the country. Yeah.
Just a few more things here before we wrap up. You know, the title of the book, again, for my listeners, is Laughing All the Way to Freedom, Americanization of a Russian Emigre. Can you talk about that concept? What do you mean when you say Americanization? And what is the road to Americanization, I suppose?
Well, that's I believe the American. Okay, if you wish. Only now, after already more than 40 years, over 50 years, I became, in many ways, much more American, if you say Americanization, than I was upon arrival, because I accepted this as normal things that struck me as odd and incomprehensible as I was before. From that standpoint, this is Americanization. In other words, you accept the values, the main core values of the country in which you live. And I have to say that I almost feel like it's my duty to explain this process for others. And I now finishing, I'm sharing with you as a writer, finishing now a novella in which I describe a huge family of Russian immigrants, I mean Jews from the Soviet Union, and which they all together are in different ways. In other words, some of them are, okay, most of them vote for Republicans, okay? Some of them, their children are married not of their kind, but of, let's say, not Russian Jewish girl, but Puerto Rican girl, okay? The next generation, in other words, only it takes 40 years, means 2 more generations to become American. In other words, to leave behind what you came from, to learn anew. In other words, new generation is not burdened by what we were burdened with, that we have to fight and understand it. So from that standpoint, Americanization, that means, yes, they say, somebody even says recently, even they're right, in third generation, everybody is American. Third generation, you realize. And so I understand that the whole family, which I'm describing now, they in their spectrum, this is the spectrum of America. There are right-leaning, left-leaning, there are ethnically this, let's say some marry Puerto Rican, some marry people from Dominican Republic, and so on and so forth. It's a natural way of life changing and so on. So that's what I mean by Americanization. Coming to America finally, not just physically, but culturally. That's what I meant.
I hope this isn't an odd question, but I think when some people hear Americanization, they'll think, does that mean that I'm leaving behind all the other aspects of my identity? So for example, I always insist that I'm a hyphenated American. So I will say I'm very proud of my Italian heritage, Italian American. That's what I insist on being sort of identified as. Is that also true for someone like yourself, where you view yourself as a Russian American or a Jewish American? And how much can those two identities exist at the same time?
Well, I think that's America, that you can be at the same time, you can be Italian, you can be a Russian Jew, you can be a Chinese. And look, even if you look at the spectrum, it's not only Russian Jewish immigration, any other immigration. They have, what we talked about in Russia, we have Brighton Beach, right? However, there is a Chinatown, there is a little Tokyo, there's also little Italy, and so on. In other words, immigrants coming to this country, they, in time, they take over. I mean, in America, they either stay in their language, in their culture, like Brighton Beach or Chinatown, or you get education, you learn English, you go into other professions, other areas, and so on. This is America. America is a country of immigrants, and you cannot deny it, and you cannot fight it, basically, because that's what it is, and it benefits greatly because of the fresh blood. And some of the people don't understand it. Those who are, I know about immigration, so lazy people don't immigrate, okay? People with no energy do not immigrate. People with no ambition do not immigrate. You understand? So those who try to come, try to make the most of our world. Okay, that's what it is. That's, in my view, the future of America is future of the world. You know, you come, you can be what you want to be if you put enough efforts into it. And I believe, in my modest way, I proved it, after all. I would never dream even having education that I got in America. 20 years ago, my mother told me, when I told her, listen, my teacher said that my writing is quite interesting. I wanted to get them. Are you kidding me? She said, you kidding me? You're Soviet Union. What are you talking about? It's an ideologically very sensitive area, writing and so on. No. Only you get the engineering degree, then do whatever you want, okay? So it took me 20 years coming to America to get eventually what I really want to. Okay, and now I'm still teaching, believe it or not, one course in my college, Hunter College, one course per semester, but I still teach Russian cinema in society. In the fall, I have already 25 students, and every spring I have East European cinema. So that's it. You're in America. That's all.
The last thing I want to touch upon, because you've taught students over the years, how do you think, you know, those of us that were born in the U.S. rather than immigrated here, how do you think we may view things differently? Do you think sometimes maybe people that were born in the U.S. maybe are too critical of America and miss the positive aspects? Can you talk a little bit about your feelings on those issues?
Absolutely. No, thank you for this question, because the best compliment for my teaching I got from one student who was born in America, a Russian Jewish student. She was born in America, and at the end of the semester, after my Russian cinema and society, she came up to me and said, thank you very much. You made me understand my parents. You understand? Because she, being born American, she could not understand all what things that we actually discussed today quite a bit, of all this, how it looks like you come from totally from as outsider, totally from different cultural perception and so on. So that, I think that's all what I try to do, is that the American, if they really want to, as I said, she was really, said, my God, now I understand. Now I understand my father. So why is that way? Because when you grow up, you cannot shade immediately your early, it's called early socialization. In other words, what happened to you, like a baby learns language without nobody giving lessons of the language. Baby just imitates, hear how it says, and gradually start talking, okay? So that's how you acquire the world around you, the culture, you get it in. So it takes, obviously, a lifetime. It may not take lifetime, as I said, again, in my case, finally to put, taught to them to understand that this is, you were conditioned the way you grew up, and that's what it is. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, you mentioned, just the values of being American. What do you consider the core values of, being an American?
I would say core value, I would say that recently my neighbor, I have a friend, I have a few American friends, my neighbor, when I express to him that anytime mind you, I'm already a long time in America, nevertheless, when I get an official notification from some authority, last time I read something that I know that I paid, and I was frozen. I thought, my God, blah, blah, blah. He said, no, we know our rights. It's have to be something that it never would cross my mind. I'll give you another example of that recently I could not even fathom that it's possible. I had a friend, unfortunately, who died a year ago, but it happened, the incident took a few years before that. I talked to him on the phone. He's in Southern California, lived in Southern California. talking on the phone, and all of a sudden I hear his voice kind of became weak and then dropped. And I couldn't understand what's going on. So I called our mutual friend, American, and I told her, listen, I don't understand what happened. What do you think? And she said, well, let's quickly check his address. Is this correct? I said, why do you need his address? Because I wanted to call the police. Police? I said, mind you, after so many years in America, police? The least I would think of calling police for help. He said, no, they have wellness check. Okay. So she called police, they checked, they came to the building, they asked manager to open the room, and they found him on the floor. He fainted because they called the ambulance and they brought him to hospital and so on. You see, some things that I say, despite so many years in America, I still would not think that I am totally American in that respect, because it doesn't come naturally to me that, hey, I have rights, I'm protected by law and so on, because I was never protected by law when I was growing up. Okay, I didn't know what does it mean.
I also wanted to ask you, so you wrote satire when you lived in Odessa for the Crocodile. You also wrote satirical stories published in America and often about America in the Russian Emigre press and in American periodicals. Can you talk about how you approach satire in America and writing satirical stories in the American press?
Well, I have to say that I realized that, okay, I'll give you one example. One of the things that I could not understand in America is the place of literature in the system values of society. In Russia, because of its history, about the again, authoritarian system, which was always the core of the country, only literature of especially second part of the 19th century, had the opportunity to talk about the ills of society in a direct artistic language and so on. Okay, so therefore, the position of a writer in Russian culture was always higher. It was almost like a priest in America. In other words, he's not simply an entertainer. And here, what happened to me in America, real accident. I was still a graduate student of UCLA, and I passed by some small bookstore in Santa Monica, California, and I saw a book with no cover and with some ink on the front. I could not understand how. First of all, it's sacrilegious. You understand, the book is always something that you hold on, especially, of course, those who will looked up to find some truth about life spoken in indirect sapient language and so on. But here I couldn't understand. I picked up the book. It was a book, a collection of stories by Isaac Bashevis Singer, and I couldn't understand it. Well, he was a Nobel Prize. I read his stories in New Yorker, his Nobel Prize laureate. What happened? So I asked my classmate, American classmate, ask him, listen, I understand how it could be. He said, Emil, it's pure economy. Probably the bookstore has a very short kind of a space for bestsellers that really bring money, okay? And they have an agreement with the publisher that if the book doesn't sell, they'll cut the cover and send it back for getting their money back and so on. That's nothing. So it is this particular struck me so strong that I wrote a satirical piece that was published in Studies in Contemporary Satire, in which I described Leo Tolstoy coming to American publishing house with War and Peace, and how he's talking to the editor in chief of the I call it Double Dumb publishing, it doesn't matter, in which kind of comes true that basically total different understanding of it. This is in American literature primarily it's entertainment industry, And so therefore they speak in there. So it was published in America. Now the other piece that I mentioned before about the Save Kisa protesting was published in English in Los Angeles Herald Examiner. And I couldn't understand for a while why they would publish it. But until I realized, and I describe it in my book, that basically the editors who read it changed the title. In Russian, it was simply Save Kisa, okay, in the original, specifically. In English, they say, blame it on Uncle Sam. That's the American way. In other words, they made it as a satire against people always blaming Uncle Sam and things like that. You see what I mean? What I'm trying to say that this, I found, well, I would say, I didn't never count it, but quite a bit of my pieces were published in satirical pieces, published in American press. Why not, if there is such a point of view? You understand? This is America. Again, it would be not thinkable anything like that, as my own example back in the Soviet Union showed that it would be possible back in my time. No, this is America. Yeah, that shows. Yeah, yes, not everybody agrees that the literature has to be only entertainment. That may carry very important. No. So that's the standpoint of an editor who published it. Okay. That's what I mean.
Very last thing I wanted to ask you, and I know I've kept you a few minutes over, but I can tell you have very warm feelings about America and American values and culture. I think a lot of younger people today see a lot of the political polarization, or they're worried about issues like income and wealth inequality increasing in the US, or they're worried about abortion rights, and maybe they have developed colder feelings about America because of that. What do you want to say to those listeners, especially younger ones, that may just not see a great future ahead of us in terms of where America is headed, or they're worried about that? Maybe they're losing sight of the positive aspects of American life and its people. What do you want to say to them?
Well, actually, you're right. I mean, yes, not only young people, I would say also, America today is not America when I came in. It was 1975, totally different from political point of view, such a polarization that didn't exist at that time. Yes, but America, I always remind myself, I look historically, America went through a very difficult period in periods in their life. I mean to say, protests against Vietnam War. It may be many Americans will be shocked to see that back in the Soviet Union, many of us, means liberally hating the Soviet system, where our sympathies were on the other side, because we knew the Soviet Union tried to overrun the world, things like that. Or let's say McCarthyism. That was a horrible period in American life. How it was fed by the real-time Cold War that was in existence, and that's why it took footage and so on. So America, in my view, that America still has potential because of its open system. Even somebody said to me, and one of my friends said, yeah, I know you worry that maybe leaders, one of the parties will overtake and become a kind of authoritarian. America cannot be authoritarian because of so many laws that are not necessarily federal law. There are local laws, there's state laws, and there's not so much you can do if there is, in the nature of the country, is not authoritarian by its nature. You see what I mean? It fights the disease, if you wish. Okay, while back in the Soviet and now in Russia is back where always war. Few people realize that. Some of my Americans say, "Oh, if somebody would try to get Putin out of his misery and so on," no, it would not change much. It will be another guy, because the whole cultural paradigm is based on central power and what the boss still vast majority of people support him, not because of the conscience, because they don't have no other way to understand it. how else it could be. In America, there's something that was back in my time says that in Russian understanding, freedom is disorder in the streets. They don't understand the very concept of law. Yes, freedom under law, okay? And I read it even, and I quoted in my book, I found that somewhere in American writing that in the land of the free, law is the king. That's it, nothing else is left. If you observe law, if you try to put it, you have something that can take together the country. That's my view of it.
Well, hey, Emil, I want to thank you again for coming on Parallax Views. How can my listeners purchase the book? And do you have you have a website, right?
I have a website, but they can directly call the publisher. There is a direct call. First of all, my books are on Amazon, all of them, Amazon.com. Secondly, I believe I send it to you. There is I don't have it on that. There is a direct phone number, the McFarland, the publisher, and you can order your book, the book.
Okay, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Thank you. Yeah, in a year or so, I plan to do the other one. Okay.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Emil Draitser. And as always, if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. I could really use your support in light of my not having an advertiser at this moment. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.